You know, there are many emerging topics, and it's sometimes when I'm asked, as I have just been, to name one, it's hard. And I think that's a sign of health and strength and vigor in this field because there are many.
One of the things we continue to grapple with that grew out of, historically, are a concern around ethics. So behavioral research ethics boards, as we would call them at my institution, or institutional RIBs, research boards, or review boards, as they're called more generically. In the early going, were puzzled by SoTL research. Is it okay for an instructor to actually be conducting research on his or her own students? Isn't that biased? Doesn't that involve coercion rather than informed consent? These were important questions to get sorted out, and I think we're getting there. But those led to questions about how we actually work with students when we conduct SoTL research. We have some answers. We're changing our prepositions. We're working with students. We're not experimenting on students. And we're not just collecting data from students, although we still do a lot of the on and from. But the with is, I think, one of the hot issues today, and maybe for some time, because it's thorny and challenging. Action research methodology helps us understand how we can engage the object of our research in the design and in the analysis of that research. So we can learn from participatory action research. I think that's one of the key areas for SoTL, how we engage students in it as partners without really contaminating our methodology. That's a fun one to look at.
First of all, selfishly, as a staff member, love to see more partnership with staff. So just a broader idea of what different voices looks like. So not just students, but the idea of co-inquiry. Students, staff, faculty, and maybe perhaps alumni, now that I'm in that realm as well, would be really interesting, I think, to have that broader spectrum of participants in SoTL. And I would also like to see purely student-based research as well, purely student initiatives or programs or whatever it happens to be. I can't really say, but I just think it would be really neat to have a fully student team, etc., and for sure to have students involved on the planning boards and just very integrated in terms of, I know even this conference itself, the price was pretty high. We put forward at the end of our special interest group meeting, the students as co-inquirers. Last year we put forth a list of initiatives, proposals really to the board to figure out what we could try to do to make it a little bit easier for different colleges and universities to bring in students, and hopefully we keep moving towards that route of thinking of how do we involve more and more.
Among the new emerging ideas, the two that have sort of captured me the most, one was reflected in a session here at the conference this year on the role of students. It was a very thoughtful set of ideas, summarized a lot of work. A number of people have been promoting that idea, but this brought together the root difference in the metaphor of students as objects or products versus students as agents. And there are many different words and metaphors used for that. Co-producers, co-learners.
The role of students in the scholarship of teaching and learning. There has been quite a vigorous group of people concerned with how you bring the wide variety of ways you can bring students into the work. Of course, they and their work and their experience are the very thing that scholars of teaching and learning are concerned with. So they are always involved in that sense, but there are more active ways of involving them. And exploring those is, I think, one of the cutting-edge areas for the scholarship of teaching and learning, and a place where it touches up against other movements in teaching and learning in higher education, including the undergraduate research and student engagement. There are a whole number of ways in which this is an area of convergence and one in which we need to be more thoughtful, and quite a bit of work is being done now. And so that's one that I'm excited about.
It goes a little bit beyond SoTL, this whole spirit of engaging with students. And it also goes towards informing students about the results of our research so that students can benefit from it. Maybe you can't do it during the study immediately when you're gathering your data, but this is something I would really keep my eye out for.
I have believed for several years that one of the most important changes that needs to take place in the scholarship of teaching and learning is to think of it less and less as a matter of individual inquiry and as a matter of collective inquiry. Almost no research that goes on in any field of knowledge that's undertaking really complex problems is done by individuals working alone. If we consider learning and the improvement of education as a major complex problem around the globe, then I think we have to treat it the way we would treat other kinds of complex research. It needs to be undertaken in teams, it needs to be undertaken in labs, it needs to be undertaken in interdisciplinary collaborations where different ways of knowing and different strengths are brought to bear. What's different about the scholarship of teaching and learning is that the focus is often the learning that's taking place in an individual classroom. So we're looking at a somewhat intricate balance between the setting of individual inquiry and collaboration across that inquiry. But I think that within institutions of higher education, for example, one of the most important things that, for example, Centers for Teaching and Learning can do is to create a collaborative ethos and true collaborative momentum around scholarship of teaching and learning, to think of it as collective inquiry, to think of an institution as the building up of individual and collaborative inquiry, programmatic inquiry, and institutional inquiry. So I really think the kind of collectivizing of inquiry and thinking of it not as an individual paradigm, but really to think of the scholarship of teaching and learning fundamentally as a collaborative inquiry paradigm is not only important for the growth of the scholarship of teaching and learning, I think it's absolutely imperative if the scholarship of teaching and learning is going to be relevant at all in the next couple of decades.
One of the things that I think SoTL work could be attentive to in the future is one of my own favorite themes, namely scholarship of leadership. So knowing in a scholarly way and scholarly based inquiries, again, in what way leadership matters in order to promote student learning and professional development of academic teachers. And I'm not thinking mainly about university managers, but rather leadership at all levels within the academic organizations. And I think there are some interesting beginning work there, but much more to do.
I think an important question, I don't know if it's a trend, is to what extent can one internationalize the movement? Because it is still very much a US-based enterprise, and although it has expanded in different regions of the world, I think there's still a lot of work to do in that respect. So internationalization, and I think linked to that is the sense that we are sharing common problems in a common world, and therefore our approach to teaching and our questioning around it is probably something that needs to be a common field as well. So the opening up to questions around our role as educators in higher education in the 21st century, in an international context, those are the kind of debates which I think we need to engage in.
There is so much happening, so much change right now in the relationship among face-to-face time, online time, and the feedback loop within a learning community. There are enormous opportunities for people to experiment, to do new and innovative things. but to save the results, to be systematic about it. You don't have to do random assignment experiments, but if you teach a course more than once and you have changed something, if you've saved the evidence from the first course, you can then ask yourself, at least, did it get better? Do I prove it? Is it possible something else? Of course not. But it's a great opportunity to keep archives of student work. It's not enough just to save the grades, because you may have some other way you want to look at the student work different from the one you used for grades. So I think the big opportunity we have is to ask which of the many things we're being suggested we should be doing, from hybrid to fully online to mobile devices to whatever. It's a great opportunity for us, because we're good documentarians, and to create an archive, to be systematic about what we add to our courses and be ready to be systematic in looking at the products of those courses, namely the work of the students who are in the experience. I think that's a huge area for SoTL.
The entry, the full-scale entry of technology into face-to-face classrooms is also really interesting, and a compelling change that's happening right now. So the hybrid nature of social life is salient also in the classroom. Students may be texting in class. Is that a problem? Is that an opportunity? Facebook, what kinds of communication happen there? Are they opportunities? Wikis, YouTube. I mean, there's all this stuff that is out in the popular culture that we can consider also in the classroom. And it's changing the world that the students are in, and the world that they're entering into, in ways that raise significant challenges for the nature of expertise and knowledge, what it means to know a particular field and be considered qualified to work in that field. So that's technology, I think, is changing things. As much as some of us may want to resist some of those changes, it is changing things significantly.
Institutionalization of the scholarship of teaching and learning is very much on people's minds across the countries who are involved, particularly in the U.S. That is an issue which has a set of tensions connected to it. But how, by institutionalization, we really mean, I think, how do you have the structures, the people involved in this work that make it inviting and possible for people to join it without sacrificing their careers or without having to go to too many, to go out of their way too much to create them for themselves. The pioneers have been willing to do that, but if we want scholarly teaching to be the norm in higher education, and we see the scholarship of teaching and learning as contributing to that possibility, we need to make it easier for people to do that and have support for them in the institutions and have the kind of leadership that makes it possible.
I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is the need to think about the scholarship of teaching and learning as having an effect, or an impact, if you will, on institutions, on programs, on units that are larger than the individual classroom. And I think that is really, it's a very good place for SoTL to get. It's also a very dangerous place because of the fact that it can be assimilated in ways that were not intended, or it might be less than productive, let's say. When, for instance, SoTL is attached to or even identified with assessment, it takes on all of the baggage of assessment. When, however, SoTL is asked to rethink assessment methods, then there's quite a bit of value. And I think it's that push and pull. So I would caution someone who's just coming into the field to, yes, attach their work to institutional work or work of the larger units, but to make sure that the questions remain interesting and consequential to themselves.
I think we haven't really used SoTL scholarship yet to investigate back our disciplines, to really look at that as, you know, what do the students say about our discipline? How can we be critical about the development of our disciplines? Not just its teaching and learning component, but general, the knowledge production, knowledge construction component by, you know, using the classroom as another field for investigation.
One of the developments that I'm excited about, and I think a lot of people are, is adding to the kind of work that most people begin with, some more collaborative work. So there'll always be a place, one would hope, for work that individual scholars would do in their own classroom, focused on their own students. But increasingly, I'm seeing people coming together around questions that cut across courses. So I might work with another person in an English department to ask about some aspects of learning that we haven't, you know, that we worry about or focus on in common across courses in the field, or might work with others across fields who are, you know, worrying about writing, for instance. So more collaborative work with others around larger outcomes, if you will. And I think there's a lot of benefit there in terms of the opportunities for collaboration and also the opportunity to contribute to larger agendas at the institutional level.
I think the future is largely going to be shaped by organizations like SoTL and, dare I say, STLHE, because we are the ones who have mandated our goal or our vision to shape that future. You know, so a lot of the folks who take leadership positions in organizations like SoTL firmly believe there is a bright future in terms of teaching and learning. And the future, in a way, we take responsibility for in giving our take on how it might unfold.